Hi, I'm Dennis Potter. We seem to be having more shootings in the workplace and public places than ever before. The Mass Shooting Tracker, which catalogs such incidents, reported on January 5th of 2016 that there were 372 mass shootings in the U.S. in 2015, which killed 475 people and wounded 1,870. A mass shooting is an incident which kills or injures 4 or more people, including the assailant. 53% of mass killings are family-related, and 21% of the deaths, the assailants were unknown to the victims. 16% were public killings, 10% were the result of robbery or burglary. According to the U.S. Today, after examining the FBI information of 2016, discovered that a breakup seems to be the trigger between about 25% of mass killings that do not involve strangers, or it's a robbery gone wrong or gang involvement. We are certainly more aware of violence today than around the world and in our own country. And this has led me to explore the idea of how our reactions can be different to these type of events rather than the regular events that we experience that are disruptive to the workplace. Violence that we experience in the workplace generally will fall into 4 categories: disgruntled employees, domestic violence situations, robbery gone bad, and terrorist attacks on our business or in our community. In most settings, we would expect shooters to be from outside of our organization, not our colleagues and workmates. We are supposed to be safe within our work site. And we can understand coming under attack in a combat zone, but not at our workplace, not at our home. Shootings in these settings are unsettling because of this sense of violation of our sense of personal safety and our trust in our colleagues. When we look at categories of disgruntled employees or situations involving domestic violence, our assumptions about our fellow employees are shattered, at least temporarily. We are not only have to worry about the mysterious strangers, but we have to look at everyone in our organization and around us with some level of suspicion. In general, no one we know would be a killer, or violence isn't going to happen to people we know, and certainly not at our work site. Then it suddenly does, and we may be left temporarily with our shattered illusions of safety. The FBI lists homicide as the 3rd cause of death in the workplace. Our world has been shaken. Our sense of loss of personal safety runs rampant. And I believe that we grieve the loss of these intangibles in much the same way that we grieve the loss of someone dear to us. And why not? After all, our sense of safety is very dear to us. And it is necessary for us to enjoy our surroundings and our lives. So we go to great lengths to create the fantasy that we're always going to end our work shift in the same condition that we went to work, albeit a little more tired. And then suddenly these myths are brought up short by the reality of the violent event. When violence stems from a domestic violence issue, employees become fearful and suspicious of their colleagues. How many others might be in this kind of situation? How can we protect ourselves from other people's problems? For individuals living in an abusive relationship, they can fear for their own lives, and especially if they are considering leaving the abuser. This can leave them fearful and anxious, reducing their efficiency at work. For the aftermath of a robbery gone wrong, most common themes are, it could have been me, it could have been my friend, I could have died. The fear of repetition provokes thoughts of leaving the job to find something safer to work. We frequently hear statements that stem from second-guessing every action or thought the person had before, during, or immediately after the robbery. Rarely are these thoughts in a positive nature, but then why should they be? Think about ourselves for a minute on an average day. How many times a day do we tell ourselves, I handled that situation well, or that these pants don't make my, or I'm having a good hair day, or, well, you can fill in the blanks for you. So we know that these common ways of negative thinking for routine situations, so why would they be different if we face something that we never imagined ourselves ever facing. Lastly, we have the rise in terrorist attacks in other countries and in our own world. These attacks are designed to create terror and distrust of our government. They are to make us feel unsafe, uncomfortable, unsafe in our communities, in our places of worship, in our movie theaters, our schools, our places of work. Terrorists want us to feel unsafe for ourselves and for our families. So for many of this, the big question is, why are they on the rise, and what can we do to help people in the aftermath of these situations? J. Reed Malloy, PhD, in an article called "The Lone Terrorist in the Workplace" in the winter 2014 newsletter of Work Trauma Services, Inc., spoke to this issue quite eloquently. The article was written a few months after the beheading of a staff person in a food processing plant and the Fort Hood shootings. He describes 3 issues that might help to explain the individual's motivation. First is personal grievance. Similar to all acts of targeted violence, the pathway typically begins with a personal grievance, an event or a series of events that involve loss and often the perceived humiliation of the subject, his or her continual rumination about that loss, and then the blaming of others. Most people with grievances in the workplace eventually deal with their loss, but those who are unwilling or unable to, often the most narcissistically sensitive individuals, it is much easier to convert their shame into rage against the object which is their belief is the cause of all their suffering. Such intense grievances require that the individuals take no personal responsibility for the failures in their life. Second is moral outrage. The lone terrorist, however, begins to distinguish himself from others on the pathway to violence because he embeds his personal grievance in a historical, religious, or political cause or event. The suffering of others, which may be misperceived or actual, provides the emotional fuel for his personal grievance. He closely identifies with the victimized group, whether they be aborted fetuses, an endangered animal species, rainforest, gun owners, Muslims, those who fear the U.S. government, those whose prejudice is equal opportunity. And he labels all those who are different as the oppressors, often on the basis of skin color or spiritual belief. He then knows who to hate. What is ironic is that the lone terrorist often has never actually suffered oppression or been victimized as a member of the group with whom he identifies. This is vicarious identification. Framed by an ideology, the motivation is completed then when the personal grievance and moral outrage is framed by the spiritual belief. Current analysis indicates that the lone terrorist ideologies include right-wing extremism, Islamic extremism, anti-abortion beliefs, or rationalization separatism. Upon closer examination, these conscious belief systems are usually quite superficial. In fact, subjects will cherry-pick phrases from relevant authoritative text to justify their desire to kill others and perhaps themselves. This framing is absolutist and simplistic, providing a clarity that both rationalizes their behavior and masks perhaps other more personal grievances. They become violent true believers, intent on killing others in order to advance their pathway towards the act of targeted violence. I do not claim to be an expert in this field, but Malloy's observations have a ring of accuracy about them. It's worrisome that attacks by these people can often seem inexplicable. The people in this category seem so normal on the outside, yet obviously seething on the inside. So how do we help people who are stunned by the violence, grieving the loss of their friends, grieving the loss of sense of personal safety, and questioning their abilities to know anyone again with enough confidence to feel safe? On the one hand, our usual interventions, which are designed to give an opportunity for people to vent their thoughts and feelings, to validate those reactions, and to help them explore skills that they might have used in the past to get through these kind of events, may now somehow seem trite. and superficial. But are they? I think not. I would still expect the survivors to be dealing with the big three: guilt, anger, grief, but perhaps with a slightly different twist. Guilt is usually connected to the thoughts the employee has or are having about what they should have, could have, or would have done differently to alter or prevent the event. These are usually called Monday morning quarterbacking or second guessing, in which the person is reinterpreting everything that they thought or did based on the known outcome, as opposed to being where they were at the time. This guilt is likely to show up in any kind of an event in two areas. Why didn't I see it? Why didn't I predict it? What could I have done to prevent it? The first area's guilt is the most similar to what we see in most events. I think the second area is different, though, after shootings, because it often takes on an element of questioning personal bravery, personal self-identity. Why didn't I rush the shooter? Why wasn't I armed? Or if I was armed, why didn't I shoot him? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And while the elements may be slightly different, at its heart, it is still self-blame. A teaching point here might be to talk about the fact that people are in pain around the event and certainly wish that it hadn't happened, understanding that there is no guarantee that had they done something differently, it would have altered the outcome. This is sometimes helpful to remind them. Anger is usually connected to wanting to blame someone or something for the event. If the anger is at the perpetrator, it's probably pretty healthy. But leadership or company is often blamed for not preventing the incident. This is often misplaced anger. Anger at God or spiritual traditions are commonly referred back to their spiritual leadership for answers. It is outside our role as consultants to directly address spiritual issues, except to validate them and state that they are common. Teaching point here is to direct them back to spiritual leadership for further information. The anger, of course, can be generalized to a group of people the perpetrator was or thought they were representing, or towards anyone or anything, no matter how accurately or inaccurately. Grief after the loss of someone they care about is certainly an easy thing to understand. But traumatic incidents trigger a variety of much more intangible losses. This most common one is the loss of sense of personal safety. This can be an understanding that if this type of event can happen to the deceased, it can happen to me, can happen to my friends, can happen to my family, etc. Traumatic incidents happen because we have no control over them. This temporary feeling of the loss of our illusions of control and safety can be profound. The grief is also oftentimes more intense. Not only are they grieving the loss of comrades and colleagues, but perhaps more importantly, again, the loss of sense of personal safety. The key question here is, where can I be safe? And again, their spiritual beliefs may be challenged. In short, the world has shifted for them, and they've had no control over that shift, in wrestling then with how to get my world back under control. People will grieve these intangible losses in the same fashion that we grieve the loss of our friends and loved ones. It's just that we often do not realize these intangible losses or how they are affecting us. So the teaching points here are to help people understand multiple losses, and that the grief is a process they will be moving through over the next few days, few weeks, or perhaps even longer. Providing information on understanding that they are grieving and some things that they can do to help move through the grieving process is most often helpful. How do we do that? Well, Hopful, Watson, etc., in a research study of the aftermath of interventions for disasters, found 5 underlying strategies that no matter what model of intervention we are using, seem to be most helpful. These are providing a sense of safety, providing a sense of calming, providing a sense of community, a self-efficacy, a sense of connectedness, and 5th, a sense of hope. First, we want to promote a sense of safety. This means both physical and emotional safety. There's absolutely no point in trying to emotionally or verbally process an event if the participant feels like the event is still going on. Helping the individual realize that the immediate danger is past and that they are now safe is an essential feature before going on to the next stage. Second, and somewhat closely related, is helping the employee return to a more calm state. We can do this by helping them understand the freeze, flight, fight response to events and encourage them to understand they might still be operating at full steam ahead on high alert, because this makes sense. They are understandably reacting with their innate survival instinct and the corresponding flood of cortisone and other stress chemicals that serve to maximize survival during crises. Third element is to help with connectedness. The realization that I am not alone. I am not the only one going through this. Often after a disruptive event, people who are affected have a tendency to a sense of isolation while they're trying to work with it. The feeling like I'm the only one that feels like this. And this may be especially true for the folks that are most intensely affected. But helping them to re-engage with the larger world, to reconnect with family, with friends, with their faith community, with coworkers, helps them to realize they do not have to walk this road alone. Fourth is the focus on self-efficacy, the belief that I am able and capable of making good decisions on my own and my family's behalf. This really boils down to addressing that sense of hopelessness and victimization that sometimes follows a disruptive event. We do this by asking them, have you ever been through an event similar to this? What did you do that was helpful for getting through it? This simple reminder helps them identify the core strengths that they have within themselves. Being able to give them information on things other people have found helpful gives them some new ideas for handling this difficult situation. Our attitude of expectation of their ability to return to normal is extremely important for this principle. You see, there are many different strategies for coping with a disruptive event, but they only work if we believe that they will. And finally, the last element is hope. Tapping into the strength of the human spirit, our innate ability to rise above the circumstances and envision a world that, while perhaps never quite the same, is still a future that holds promise. Hope is recognizing there will be another tomorrow. There will be a new normal, and that the future is worth pursuing. Maybe these are the best we have right now. They certainly have worked in a wide variety of settings in the past. And at the very least, it gives us a starting point for helping folks recover after a dramatic event. Thank you.